louder or closer.
I'll try this. For those of you who might not be familiar, the League is a nonpartisan political organization dedicated to encouraging citizens to be informed participants in their government on the local, state, and national levels. This is Wednesday, October 12th, and tonight we will meet candidates for state representative and the state senate. The forum is being live streamed onto the League of Women Voters of Ames and Story County Facebook page. It is also being recorded and will be played on KHOI-FM 89.1 at a later date. I am Barb Peterson, a member of the League, and I will moderate tonight's forum. And let's begin. All declared candidates for these offices have been invited to this forum, and we regret that some candidates did not respond to our invitation. Tonight we have with us Herman Quirmbach, candidate for the Iowa State Senate, Penny Vossler, candidate for State Representative, District 48, Beth Wessel-Krishel for District 49, Ross Wilburn for District 50, and Joshua Herbert for District 55. The forum this evening will be divided into three sections. First will be the candidates' opening statements. Secondly, questions from you, the audience, and finally, closing statements from the candidates as time allows. Audience members, if you have a question to ask the candidates, please raise your hand and a runner will bring you a card. I will read the questions to the candidates from the podium. Candidates will be giving 90 seconds to each give their response to the audience questions. If there are questions yet to be asked as 8 o'clock approaches, audience questions will take priority over closing remarks. In the tradition of the League of Women Voters, we want every candidate to have an equal say, so candidates, please try to limit your opening remarks to 3 minutes each. So 3 minutes each for opening remarks, 90 seconds to answer audience questions, and at the end of the evening, you will each have 2 minutes to give your final statements. Our timekeeper, John Klaus, will hold up a card when you have 30 seconds left in your time allotted. So now we will start with introductory remarks, and let's start with Mr. Quirmbach.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the League for sponsoring this forum. It is always a pleasure to attend League functions. Full disclosure, I've been a member of the League for about 25 years, so but it serves a very important civic purpose. I was talking to a couple of other candidates just this weekend, and I emphasized to them, one of whom was a first-time candidate, that the main purpose of a campaign wasn't to get involved in verbal fisticuffs with your opponent. The main purpose of the campaign was, number one, to present yourself to your constituents, your potential employers, but even more important than that, to listen to what they had to say, because your job, if you're elected, your job is to represent their points of view. You can't do that if you're not willing to listen. I've served in the Iowa Senate for 20 years now. My committee assignments include the Education Committee, where I'm the ranking member, the Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax writing committee, local government and commerce, and the Education Appropriation Subcommittee. I've spent a whole lot of effort over those years working on education policy, trying to do a better job with funding for K-12 and with the universities, and we'll have more to say about that. The last 6 years of Republican control have been miserable. But I think that there are a lot of other issues that we need to talk about, one of which is mental health, and we need to talk about the environment. We need to talk about taxes and tax revenue adequacy and fairness. So those are some of the topics that I'm very concerned about, but I'm here to listen to what you have to say. So District 25, which is the district for which I'm running, is a little bit smaller than my old district. I used to have Ames plus 3 townships, rural townships to the south and east. Well, I don't even have all of Ames anymore because the population of Ames has grown enough. I lost a precinct. I think Penny, though, is going to take over that precinct, and I'm sure she'll do a great job. I still have one rural township, I still have Grant Township. So I got out last fall and knocked on every farmhouse door in my district and had a ball doing it. Okay.
Okay, yep, okay, good. And next would be Ms. Vossler.
Hi, my name is Penny Vossler, and I am currently GIS coordinator for Boone County. GIS, for a lot of people are not familiar with that, stands for Geographic Information System. So I make the maps and the apps. I also do set up and train and provide tech support for our field data collection. I do the 911 addressing and keep our 911 data current and provide that information for our dispatchers on a map, interactive map for them. And I also I implemented the software, online permitting software for the county, which is a big deal, and we maybe talk about that more later. But this is part of these things. I've spent a lot of time making our government information accessible to the citizens of Boone County and more convenient for them to interact. You no longer have to drive to the courthouse in Boone County to file a permit or to interact with most of our data. We have a website for that, and it's all available. You can look it up yourself. I grew up on a farm and ranch, so I am equally at home on a tractor or a horse. And I was never much of a gambler, so when I graduated from high school, I decided I was going to go off to college and get an education and have a job with a known paycheck every month, rather than wondering what the price of wheat and cattle would be and what your income would be. From there, my first degree was mathematics, and I was a math teacher for 13 years. Then I went off back to school for a programming degree. I've had a lifelong addiction to education. So computer science degree. I worked at the USGS Aero Data Center. Eventually an associate scientist on a NASA satellite project, followed by a software test engineering technical writer, a master's degree in space studies, and then finally a master's degree in GIS, which brought me to Iowa for that time-honored, really good reason. People say, I was in Colorado at the time, and people said, you left Colorado to live in Iowa? Why? And I said, the best reason ever, grandma time. My son was at Iowa State with my one and only grandchild. And so I put a pin and looked in a 4-hour driving distance from that Ames so I could see that little girl as often as possible. And I now have the best job I've ever had, and I want to take my skills to Des Moines and see if I can make our government function better for everybody in this state, the way I have for Boone.
Thank you. Ms. Wessel-Crushell?
Thank you. Thank you to the League for sponsoring this. It's always a great forum, and thank you for all of you who are here and everybody watching online. I am Beth Wessel-Crushell. I have been serving in the Iowa Legislature since 2005, and I am the ranking member of Human Resources. I serve on Judiciary, Public Safety, and the Justice Systems Appropriations Subcommittees. One of the things that, when I was first elected in 2005, I never thought I would be talking about, but it seems to be the discussion I'm having on a frequent basis with my constituents today, is the challenges to our democracy. And as we get closer and closer to the election, I'm hearing it more and more. I hear it not only from Democrats and Republicans, I also hear it from Republicans, and I hear it from no-party voters, that they are concerned about the health of our democracy for many reasons that we are all seeing, both at the state and at the federal level. As the election draws near, people are finding it harder to vote. And they have fewer days to vote by absentee and then they also have fewer hours to vote. We have made it, the legislature and the governor have made it so much more difficult to vote. and that is a challenge to our democracy. This is one picture I want to show you to demonstrate about how we have lost our way in many ways. But this one little snapshot of the budget I think is important. Iowa has a $1.1 billion ending balance. So let me throw out a couple other numbers to you. $1.1 billion, that's a lot of money. Iowa State University received $2.1 million new dollars, $2.1 million new dollars from the state of Iowa this year. To make ends meet at Iowa State, the Board of Regents raised tuition by 4.5%, bringing in $21.5 million from 18 to 21-year-olds. We are balancing our budget on the backs of 18 to 21-year-olds, and there's no excuse. This is misplaced values if I've ever seen it. If you are concerned about inflation, you should be concerned about the inflation that the state of Iowa is forcing on Iowa's young people. In 2022, we need to put people over politics, and that's my mantra.
Mr. Wilburn.
Thank you and good evening. I'm State Representative Ross Wilburn. I also, in my spare time, serve as chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, and I teach fitness classes at the YMCA in downtown Des Moines. Look, I know that it can feel hard for folks to engage in democracy right now, to that civic responsibility that we all share, that they're afraid to have conversations at dinner with friends and neighbors, that they're afraid to put yard signs out to express their support for their candidate. And so I get that, I understand, and this threat to democracy that's out there, it's real. It's real, and it's important that we stand up and fight for our freedoms. In fact, my family's fight for freedom started right here in Iowa, because I have a great-great-grandfather who escaped enslavement in Missouri and became part of the first Iowa Colored Regiment during the United States Civil War. And the battle flag for that unit is 1 block from the Capitol, from where I serve. And so I do this work because I believe in living up to the promise of those who sacrifice for our freedoms and my freedom. I firmly believe that. I also believe that public dollars belong in public education. I believe that we shouldn't have to work more than one job just to try and get by. And I believe that our reproductive freedoms are critical for all of us. That's the epitome of what it means to be free. I'm asking for another term. Be proud to represent Ames and Story County, to add my voice to my Democratic colleagues here. I've served on the Judiciary Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and State Government Committee, and really just looking forward to hearing from you. We are going to be putting people over politics. That's got to be what it's all about, so we can start to work together, and look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert?
I'm a father of two from Maxwell. This is my second time running for Iowa House. I'm the chair of the Story County Libertarian Party and the founder. I also founded and at one time chaired the Polk County Libertarian Party. I'm the District 4 representative on the state board currently for the Libertarian Party of Iowa. Running basically to promote personal freedom, individual liberty, marijuana legalization. I think that there's too many people out there being wrongfully prosecuted for what I see as just a wasteful prohibition. It's inevitability that it's going to be legalized. I believe the Iowa income tax should be eliminated. I think that will make it a lot easier for your average working family out there to be able to make ends meet. And I think that we could probably, especially with the surplus that we have with the state budget right now, cut enough jobs and cut enough stuff and stuff within the government to shrink it down to where we could get by on just the sales tax. Other than that, my current campaign slogan is pro-choice and everything. I fully support reproductive freedoms and generally anybody's, or everybody's personal liberty and ability to make their decisions on what to do with their own body and their own tax money, their own money, on their own. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Now I will read questions from the audience, and candidates, you will each have 90 seconds to give your response to each question. The first question: Iowa lost 7 million trees to the derecho, and the green ash borer will kill most of the ash trees. That is a lot of cooling, canopy, and carbon sequestration that needs to be replaced. Should the state of Iowa help? And let's start with Ms. Vossler.
Absolutely, the state should help, and every organization that's able to should also get involved. We need to fully fund conservation in Iowa. Legislative 2010, there was a law passed to fund conservation, and it has never been, the money's never been allocated to do that. It's time. It is time. That derecho, we'd never heard of that before a couple years ago, and now there have been two in the last 2-3 years, and we'll be hearing from them again. We need to do something now to help combat the attacks on our climate. That climate is getting more and more severe, and we need to prepare for it and mitigate the effects as best we can, but absolutely increasing our trees is very important, and the state should be involved.
Thank you. Ms. Wessel-Krushaw?
Sure. Absolutely. You know, we absolutely need to do what we can to improve our environment, to protect our natural resources, and there's no reason that we should not be doing that. Penny mentioned the I Will constitutional amendment, which if the legislature would pass an increase in the sales tax, 3/8 cents of that would go immediately would be constitution protected for conservation issues. It's a good bill. The governor over and over has tried to kind of twist that, and it's not to take money away from other good conservation programs, which is how she's proposed it. She's proposed, oh yeah, let's do I Will, but we'll take all of our REAP funds and make that I Will instead of increasing the number of dollars. We need to increase the number of dollars that we have in our conservation and natural resources. I'm fully supportive of that.
Thank you. Mr. Wilburn?
Yes, our state should be involved because there was a constitutional amendment that said there should be funds dedicated towards doing that, and that would be the I Will program. We do need to continue to retain REAP funds, and communities do a great job of trying to use those dollars to help rebuild that green, breathable space and places for us all to recreate ourselves and with each other. And utilizing the skills and knowledge of the Department of Natural Resources, connecting with the Corps of Engineers, even on the federal level, to try and broaden that reach to replace that and to continue conservation efforts, and let's incentivize some businesses and corporations to maintain some green space and to try and replenish what was lost.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert?
I'd say that the government doesn't really have any business in that. The emerald ash borer will eventually run its course regardless of what we do. Other than that, I guess we could try to promote the planting of trees, but I don't see that there's any business that the government has in doing anything to incentivize it. I guess they could probably do something like a tax plan to possibly give people tax breaks for planting trees, but that's about the only thing I could think that the government really could do to step in, or any place that it would have in incentivizing or having any role in any kind of conservation as such.
Thank you. Mr. Krumbach?
Well, I strongly support responding to not only the tree losses in the derecho, but a whole host of other environmental concerns. As a number of my Democratic colleagues mentioned, we did pass a constitutional, we being the people of the state of Iowa, all right, ordinary voters, passed a constitutional amendment in 2010 that required the next time the state increased the sales tax, the first 3/8 of a percent, 3/8 of a penny would go to conservation, outdoor recreation, and related areas. Now, I'm not usually a fan of the sales tax. It's regressive. It falls more heavily on the poor folks than it does on rich folks in terms of the percentage of their income. But 3/8 of a penny isn't all that much. I mean, you can imagine going down to Lowe's and spending $100 on a power tool, or going up to Penny's and spending $100 on, shirts or blouses or something. On $100, that would be 37.5 cents. Okay, not going to break the bank. And I think that in terms of encouraging appreciation of nature, in terms of encouraging outdoor exercise, which a lot of us, speaking personally, could use more of, I think that this is something that we really should do. It got 62% of the vote in the same election that brought Terry Branstad back to Terrace Hill. Okay, it was a Republican landslide, but there was a landslide in favor of this constitutional amendment. Now, the Republicans have not seen fit to bring forward a clean bill to do that. As was mentioned, there have been some discussion about raising the sales tax, but offsetting that with decreases in other taxes, which would leave revenue neutral, which means that every dollar that goes into conservation or state parks would have to come out of education or Medicaid. Those are the two biggest parts of the state budget. So I think we should go ahead with that. We're 12 years overdue, and honor the will of the people. One other thing to point out, there's also a provision in the tax code for a tax credit for people who donate their land for conservation purposes. There's been some discussion the last couple of years about abolishing that. I am firmly opposed to abolishing that. I think that a lot of people are willing to give up some of their land for conservation purposes, and if they get a little bit of a reward for doing that, to me that just means that everybody's better off.
Thank you. Next question. Do you favor the proposed amendment to the Iowa Constitution that will be on the ballot November 8th? And let's start with Ms. Wessel-Crishaw.
Sure, what you're talking about is the gun legislation that would make any laws have to meet the strict scrutiny standard, which is the highest standard, legal standard that any law has to meet. It would probably make it almost impossible for us to pass any gun sense legislation, common sense gun legislation. We got rid of the permits a few years ago, so you are not required to get a permit any longer. You can buy a gun without a background check here in the state of Iowa. And I believe we should have permits, and I believe we should have the background checks. We need to protect our children from the violence that we have seen, not only in other states, we are seeing more and more of it in this state. And so I strongly oppose that constitutional amendment. I did it on the floor. I was the lead Democrat opposing that bill on the floor of the House, and I will oppose it when I go to the polls in November.
Mr. Wilburn?
I believe in safe and responsible gun ownership. Therefore, I'm against the constitutional amendment because it doesn't allow for that. If you and I come to agreement whether you own a gun or not on something that would be sensible, someone who might be a harm to themselves, just to temporarily, put a hold on them, their ability to own or possess a gun or to purchase a gun, or some of the background checks. If we agree on those things with passage of this law, it may not matter. We may not be able to come to agreement. And so it's just, it's really antithetical to that. I will point out that, we have the Second Amendment to the Constitution. And I don't believe that it's necessary to have it in Iowa, but on the floor of the House of Representatives, we said, well, if you feel it needs to be in the Iowa Constitution, let's take the Second Amendment to the United Constitution and plant it in the Iowa Constitution. The Republicans voted no. It wasn't radical enough for them. So I will be voting no and encourage people to vote too.
Mr. Herbert?
I actually ran on this 8 years ago to put this constitutional amendment forward, so I don't support gun control in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, next question. I'm sorry, Herman. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm opposed to the constitutional amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution says, and nobody's changing that. This amendment is being marketed as well as just a sort of state-level backup to that. What they're not pointing out to you is that it deletes that qualifying phrase that begins the amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary, the well-regulated part being necessary. Our founders of our Constitution understood that we need to have some common sense regulation of guns. We do have to be able to protect ourselves. Back in colonial times, you know, it was the local militia. Well, we've evolved a little bit beyond that. At a previous forum, the libertarian who's on the ballot against me said he didn't believe there was such a thing as common sense gun legislation. I disagree. I think it's common sense that you don't let kids bring guns to school. I think it's common sense that you don't let an 18-year-old teenager buy an AK-47. I think it's common sense that you have some legal procedure when someone is having a psychological crisis with due process to temporarily take away their firearms. And if we'd had that kind of law here in Iowa and had it been invoked, the 2 women who were murdered down at Cornerstone Church early at the beginning of this summer might still be alive. That's common sense to me.
Ms. Vossler?
Okay. Let me start by saying that I am a gun owner. I grew up in a hunting family. I've inherited my grandmother's Derringer. It's, you know, in a rural area, in a heavy hunting area, everyone owns guns. But I got my first hunting license at 12. Before I was allowed to have that license, I had to take a hunter's safety course. Much like before you're allowed to drive a car, you need to take a driver's training course, pass a test that shows that you have the necessary skills to do that safely. And why is that? Because cars in the hands of people who don't know what they're doing, don't know the rules of the road, are dangerous. And that is the same thing with firearms. I believe that everybody who's going to own a firearm, the first firearm, you have to take a gun safety course that teaches you how to handle it safely, how to store it safely, and prevent so many children from accessing their parents' gun and killing themselves or another family member. These sort of things are tragedies that are preventable for the most part. Nothing is perfect, but teach people how to handle and store their guns safely. Every gun that's sold should come with a trigger lock. Just some simple basic things that will keep a lot of our people safe. And absolutely Herman spoke beautifully, and let me just second that emotion. We do not need this amendment. It is going way too far, and it will not allow anybody in the future to pass common sense gun legislation in Iowa.
Thank you. Next question. What should the state of Iowa do to address climate change? And Mr. Wilburn, let's start with you.
I used to be a mayor in the state of Iowa, and one of the things that I was proud to have done in 2007 is I signed the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. Former Mayor Ann Campbell was, I think, the second of 3 mayors in Iowa to do that. So we just need a well-rounded approach to address climate change, starting with acknowledging that climate change is real and that it exists. And therefore, what can we do proactively to, whether it's increasing green space, we just finished talking about planting of trees, to, taking a look at, I was one of the co-sponsors of the confined area, the CAFOS to put a moratorium on them so that we can take a look at how we can try and prevent that runoff, and working with beefing up things like they're doing at Iowa State University and Extension in terms of helping educate about how much nitrogen to use, fertilizer, those types of things. But even, being careful and giving cities and counties local control to take a look at their transportation planning, to have those alternatives. So it's multiple things. I just 3 days ago installed a green cone food digester in my backyard so that I can make sure that I'm not filling the landfill with food scraps. And so if all of us will do a little bit and a little bit more, then overall we will be able to have an impact on climate, as opposed to reactively having to spend millions and countrywide billions on flood repair, mitigation, tornado, and all the extremes we're having in weather.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert?
I do believe in climate change. I don't think that the government really has any role in passing legislation. I don't think that anything that they do pass is going to speed up anything. I think technological trends are already taking us more towards a green future, and I think it's just going to continue to be that way because it's cheaper to live that way. It's more viable to live that way, and the Earth's population is continuing to increase, and it's an inevitability. I would say that any legislation I would suspect that the government would pass would probably be overreaching. It'd probably hurt a lot of poor people out there, so I don't believe that they have any business, passing anything like that or being involved in that issue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kernbach?
Well, climate change is real, and climate change is largely human-made. I think the science now is clear on that. In Iowa, the good news is that we have really been a national leader in the development of wind power, using wind to generate electricity. I believe we're in the highest in the country in terms of per capita wind generation. My better half, who's literally wrote the book on wholesale electric markets, is nodding yes, so that means I'm right. What we need to do more of is solar power. Okay, now we have invested, as have many others in the city, in the little solar farm down there on the south side of US 30. We need to do more of that. We need to work on having distributed solar on rooftops. Now, to make that go, we not only have to have the generation capacity, but we also have to work on the network. We have to work on the grid. And there are some complicated issues there about how to price the solar power that's generated versus the part that's consumed from normal or traditional generating sources. But those are problems that we can solve. Now, that's on the production side. On the consumption side, electric cars are coming. There have been major developments just in recent years. I think, what car you buy is largely a personal consumption decision, although government incentives can help you move in the right direction. But having an electric car in Iowa, we're pretty spread out. So you need to have charging stations about as frequently or as widespread as gasoline stations are right now. I think we're going to be moving in that direction. We have the infrastructure bill that the Biden administration got passed this year, and I think that there's some money in there for that. But I think that we also need to make a state-level investment to make that whole system go, right? To have the distribution of the electricity, the availability of the electricity, which is going to have to be helped, I think, by the public sector, to match that with the private decisions on buying electric vehicles. Between those two things, I think wind and solar, there are a lot of other things that we could be doing, but those are two of the major ones where I think we can make substantial progress in reducing carbon emissions.
Thank you. Ms. Vossler?
Okay. We all know that climate change the climate is getting more severe. It's here to stay. There are some things we can do, and we should plan to prepare for and mitigate the effects of climate change. For one thing, We need to adjust our building codes, make sure nobody builds not only in what is a floodplain now, if anything, we have so much built up in floodplains that needs to be removed instead of insuring. If somebody gets flooded out, we can't let them rebuild in that floodplain. FEMA sometimes pays people to build back in the same flood zone over and over and over again, and that is not sustainable. Enough of that. We need to plan for drought-resistant crops, and we have, Iowa State does wonderful research in crops and not just for the climate, prepare for the crops for the climate we have, but the climate that we know is coming. Start working on transitioning some of the crops that we grow and the markets for those crops. We need to harden our power grid because, as is mentioned, we are going to have these issues. We need to build it to be sustainable, to withstand some of these heavy wind events, the tornadoes, the derechos, and the things that will be more common. We need to, another building code is to our home building code, build them to withstand, better withstand. There are different shapes that you can build that withstand wind better. A square wall is a lot worse than a wall that's gently rounded. The wind will just go around it and leave your home standing. There are a lot of building methods and materials that can be used, but the building codes need to mandate these kinds of things. Just to make, and I agree, the solar, I got a solar guy coming this week for my house, I drive a plug-in hybrid, and we are getting to the point where batteries, research has a coming that will charge in, and there are new batteries coming out of NASA research that you'll get 10 times the power out of your car battery that you get now. I can drive, with a hybrid, I can drive probably 5 hours before I need to fuel up. With, the batteries, the new batteries that are coming, they'll be doubling and tripling, quadrupling the range that you can drive on a charge. If you get a 5-minute charge and drive all day on it, charging stations aren't going to be quite as big a thing as they are now.
Thank you. Ms. Wessel-Krishel?
Thank you. It's a great question. I don't know if you've ever been in one of those conversations where you think you're talking about the same thing and then you realize that you're not. And I've had 2 of those on this very issue just recently, going door to door and talking to constituents. One of those conversations, I say, well, I know the climate's going to change tomorrow. It's going to be different. And I think, well, where's our education? Haven't we taught people that there's a difference between weather and climate? And it's so discouraging, to know that we have people who don't know the difference between those two different, very different words. A lot has been spoken about in terms we need to incentivize more solar, we need to incentivize more wind energy. If you look at the damage that climate change has done to individuals who live in poverty, I mean, it's damaging to everybody, but to individuals who lose everything to a storm like Ian or any of the hurricanes that have hit us, or tornadoes or the derecho, it is so much more severe for a family or an individual living with nothing, that we need to do this for everybody. We need to protect. We need to increase our green spaces. We need to encourage electric cars and hybrid cars. We need to also improve our infrastructure so that we can support those, our electrical infrastructure. One thing that I've heard a little reference to here, but I'm a huge supporter of and have been for many, many years, is expand or in many places create a good public transportation system. That would improve so many things, but it certainly would have an impact on reducing our carbon footprint.
Thank you. Next question. Do you think Iowa taxes are fair? Yes or no? And then explain, and we'll start with Mr. Herbert.
Ideally, I'd want to get rid of all taxes. I'd really say that there is no such thing as a fair tax. I think that's kind of a silly thing to even say. Nobody wants to pay taxes, everybody tries to avoid them. I think the most ideal situation is for us to work towards eliminating as many taxes as we can and having any kind of tax or any kind of way that we collect money by the government be voluntary, whether that's having people either donate or limiting the size of the government, or ideally running everything off of, like, say, a lotto system. I guess also we could probably keep in place sin taxes. They've been here since the beginning of the United States, but I mean, ideally, I'd like to try to work towards a society where we have next to no taxes.
Mr. Kernbach?
Well, let's start by agreeing on something obvious. Nobody likes paying taxes, okay? But there's an old saying that taxes are the price we pay for civilization. If you want public services, then somebody's going to have to pay for them, all right? Now, my libertarian friend down here at the table and the libertarian who's running against me, who I guess didn't come tonight, they say they want to eliminate the personal income tax in Iowa. You need to know, the personal income tax represents half the state's revenue, okay? So you can't spend money that you don't have, all right? Our state operates under a balanced budget regime. If you cut the revenue in half, then you're going to have to cut the support for the university in half. How much higher tuition going to go at Iowa State? How many faculty and staff are going to be laid off? State support for K-12 education cut in half. Are we going to let half the murderers and rapists out of the prisons because we can't afford to keep them? Are we going to have to cut back on Medicaid and then have people go without? Taxes are the price we pay for civilization. Now, the income tax is the only progressive tax that we have. In other words, the more you make, the more you pay, okay? Which is, I think, in a lot of people's mind, the definition of a fair tax. Unfortunately, the Republicans have passed a bill just this year that will eliminate about 20%, 22% of the state revenue by reducing the income tax. At the same time, they're making it less fair. Okay, they want to make it a flat tax so that everybody is paying the same rate, not a graduated tax, which we have now. Well, how do they start by doing that? They reduce the top bracket, the rate on the top bracket next year. Everybody else doesn't get a rate break next year, all right? The year after that, the next highest income group gets a rate break. We have to wait till 5 years in before anybody gets a rate break in the lower income levels, and then it is a much smaller fraction of their tax bill, okay? So we're taking the only fair progressive tax we have and we're flattening it, all right? Sales tax is regressive, property tax is generally believed to be regressive. So we're going to overall wind up with a tax system that is regressive, that takes a bigger bite out of the income of poor people, and will force us to dramatically reduce state services. I don't think that's good for Ames. I don't think that's good for Iowa.
Ms. Vossler?
Again, I find myself in complete agreement with Herman. And no, taxes are not fair currently. It wasn't, within the lifespan of many in this room, wealthy people, the super wealthy paid a 90% income tax rate on their income over a certain amount. And they're currently paying lower rates than I am, I think. And that's not fair. I know there are people who think that it's unfair to tax the wealthy, but if their first, give them their first couple million at a reasonable tax rate, their first 20 million, whatever you set it, and then tax them at a higher rate over that. And that would bring in, because you all know during the pandemic, the poor people got poorer, the middle class just hung on, and the wealthy got wealthier, wealthier, wealthier. They are raking it in, and I do not believe that's fair. I think the rest of, the rest of us need a little bit of a break and let them pay their fair share. Of course, we need taxes because we want things like roads and bridges and schools and law enforcement, all of those things. And another thing, if the flat tax rate is not going to it's not going to draw workers into Iowa. Iowa has become somewhat unwelcoming to workers. And then this is not going to do anything. If you put up a billboard in our neighboring states and say, move to Iowa, in 5 years, we're going to give you $50 a month off your taxes. I don't think they're going to be loading up the wagon and moving to Iowa. We need to fix that flat tax rate pretty darn quickly before the state. There's another state that tried it, Oklahoma, and they went bankrupt, and it took them a decade or more to dig out from that mistake. And now Iowa's going down that same road.
Thank you. Ms. Wessel-Kershell?
Sure. A few years ago, some Republican lawmakers from Kansas came to visit lawmakers here at the Capitol, and they said, don't make the mistake that we made. Don't cut your taxes so that you can't pay for the precious public services that they offer to Iowans. They said, we made that mistake, and now we are suffering, and we are trying to go back. We're trying to make it better, but they really struggled with that. I support great public school system. You're not going to have a great public school system without a good tax system. I support good roads, public safety, environmental protection, conservation efforts, healthcare, mental health care. I mean, there's so many services that Iowans value that are paid for through our taxes. I'm not a fan of the income tax, I'm not a fan of the sales tax. I'm not a fan of so much of property taxes. Both of them are so much more regressive than the income tax. But what we've done to the income tax in the state has made it more regressive and not as fair to all Iowans. And we need to go back and fix that. And we need to make it so that Iowans who are suffering have less of a tax burden, and those who can afford to pay for the services are taxed reasonably.
Thank you. Mr. Wilburn?
Please restate the question.
Yes. Do you think Iowa taxes are fair? Yes or no, and explain.
I do believe, given where we are at in terms of services emergency, at this point, they are fair, but they can certainly be improved. We have, as has been described, we've got several different types of tax. Some are a lot more regressive. As a former mayor and local city council member for 12 years, you've got to figure out how you pay for stuff. It's not free, and get 30 of your neighbors to agree on what services you want, and then let's figure out the combination of ways to generate revenue. The other piece to that is that we need to, in order to help keep costs low, as well as make sure that there are fair ways to invest in ourselves and our communities, that we have to watch, be mindful of the amount of corporate tax that we give away. We have lobbyists every day at the Capitol that come for a variety of causes, and those things cost money. And so to say no taxes, then nothing will get done. There's no shared costs. We can, when we are asking for different services, whether it's library or law enforcement, you don't have to whip out the checkbook to pay for everything. There's and it's been said, we don't have good, effective schools. We don't have a lot of that public safety response. If we don't agree, here's how we're going to do it. But I would tend to prefer a more progressive tax system.
Thank you. And the next question. How much of the budget surplus is from federal monies from the pandemic? Is this one-time money to make our budget look good? One more time. How much of the budget surplus is from federal monies from the pandemic? Is this one-time money to make our budget look good? And let's start with Mr. Krumbach.
The answer is a whole lot. We've had a lot of federal money coming to Iowa in several different tranches from several different bills. Some of it was pandemic related, some of it is from the infrastructure bill, excuse me. And it's easy to add up the numbers to account for all of the state's so-called surplus from the dollars that have come in from the federal government. And what isn't accounted for from those dollars is accounted for shortchanging education. All right, we have not kept up with the Republicans over the last 6 years. They've controlled state government. They have not kept up with inflation. K-12 cumulative, to add up the bottom line total, $1 billion in today's dollars. And higher ed is adding another $500 million. Now, I think I heard a figure recently that the governor was crowing about, well, we have a $1.9 billion surplus. Well, 1.5 of that has come from shortchanging our kids and their future. So, and the ramifications for that going forward, talked about this disastrous tax cut that they passed. They're saying, well, we have all this surplus, so clearly we're going to do well, and we can clearly cut taxes, and we don't have to cut services. Well, they look at all that federal money. That's one-time money. All right? The pandemic, COVID is still with us. I get that. But our society has absorbed the blow and pretty much bounced back. So those dollars aren't going to be coming in again. You know, for years, Republicans used to lecture us, you can't fund ongoing programs with one-time money. And you know something? They were right about that. I agreed with that. Now, when they have this one-time money, oh, well, we can fund permanent tax cuts with that. It doesn't wash. We're in for a real hard time 4 or 5 years down the line.
Thank you, Ms. Vossler.
Okay, yeah, my question, when you asked the question, my thought was, I don't know how much it was, but I would guess most of it, and apparently I probably got that right. My problem with we got a lot of extra money that's not coming in next year, so let's not get radical and make huge changes to our spending structure and figure that we're going to be okay down the road. We're not. And what happens when this flat tax that system that we're slowly implementing, it's not going to get to us for a while, it's going to push the costs of everything from the state no longer has the money. Those costs get pushed down to the county level and the cities, which means, of course, your property taxes are the way they have to raise money. So these savings at the state level, the tax breaks that are going mostly to the super wealthy are going to end, you will end up paying for those in your property taxes in a few short years from now. So that's not a good deal for anybody. I have to agree that money would be, that some of this surplus that we have right now, let's catch up on our school funding. When I was a kid in Montana, I took the Iowa Basic Skills Test. Iowa was the gold standard, and everybody around the nation took that skill test. It measured their kids' educational attainment against Iowa. And Iowa has now slid down to 18th or 20th in the nation, depending on which metric you're looking at, mediocre. And these kids have to compete for jobs with the better educated rest of this country and the world. Frankly, a lot of jobs are becoming global now, and we're not preparing Iowa's kids for that future. Funding the schools below the rate of inflation year after year after year, and look at it, that's happened. They've averaged a 1.9% increase, and we all know inflation has been well over 2% every year. So that means the schools are are having to cut. They're getting a smaller amount of money, or they're getting a little bit more money, but it doesn't keep up with inflation. So they have to cut staff, they have to cut services, they have to cut programs, and the kids are suffering. And it's time to prioritize. Education was once number one with Iowa, and Iowa was number one in the nation, and it's time to prioritize the future of these children again.
Thank you. Ms. Whistle-Khrushchev?
Thank you. Most of the money that we have in our ending balance, of course, is from federal government programs. And the unfortunate thing is, I don't think it makes us look any better to have $1.1 billion in the bank. It would make us look better to have $1.1 billion invested into Iowa and Iowans, to have improved our mental health system, to have improved our schools, to make sure that we have a stable economy. If we had not had that money from the federal government, we would be in a great deal of trouble. We are very fortunate that the federal government chose to invest in us, but we should not be letting that money just sit there. This is due to big portion of it anyway, was due to an economic shutdown due to the pandemic. And we needed that time to help recover, to get the vaccines, to find some treatments for the disease. And we are really, really close to getting to the point where I think they're not calling it pandemic. Some people, I'm not sure where we're at on that, but we needed that. But we also need to take that money and invest it in our economy, invest it in our young people. And we have failed to do that. It is a failure that we have that $1.1 billion in a bank.
Thank you. Mr. Wilbur?
So I can't tell you the ending balance. I mean, if our economist doesn't have it at the top of his head, I'm not going to. But I did look up on the Des Moines Register, at least on the income side, or the amount coming in, that between the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act provided the support for coronavirus, but $1.25 billion came to Iowa for the CARES Act Coronavirus Act, and it was about $1.4 billion in additional funding that the governors, at least as of that article, had to use $1.1 billion to fund various projects, of which she has not acknowledged that it's federal dollars. In fact, she can't get herself to say the American Rescue Recovery Act. She just says ARPA, and then utilizes different state programs. But a good chunk of it is clearly from that.
Mr. Herbert?
I don't know how much of it came from them, but I would say it doesn't really matter. The Republicans historically have talked a big game about being conservative on their spending, and if you look, I think it was about 2008, 2009. Our state budget was, I do believe, around $4 billion. It's now closer to $8 billion, so they're going to find a way to spend it anyways.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, we'll start with Ms. Vossler. Water well drillers in Iowa know that they have to drill even deeper. With water usage unabated, what would you back to help promote conservation, education, meetings, higher fees, crack down on watering lawns? What else?
Yeah, I know a little bit about water well testing. That's one of the permits that I created for Boone County, and that's funded by a grants to counties from the state, water well testing. And what I'm seeing is that more and more water wells, people's home water well and rural properties are coming back contaminated, seriously contaminated. A lot of coliform contamination, some other chemical contaminations, to the point, where they cannot drink it. And so we have a couple of issues besides a water table. And you know that when the water comes down so fast in these severe storms that we have that dump 6 inches in a day instead of spreading that out into a bunch of smaller storms, that does not soak into the soils and make it down to our aquifers. That runs off. The soils are not able to absorb that. And we have a number of plans in place to do things like planting grasses along the edges of streams and ponds and whatnot to prevent the runoff of farming chemicals and into the streams, some wetland preservation. There are a lot of different things that researchers know to do, and they're pushing slowly. I believe Polk County has a really good program in place to incentivize some of these kinds of things in the rural areas to help prevent the water from running off too quickly and allowing it to stay and sink into the soils. And it also then prevents the water from pulling the chemicals off the fields and dumping them into our lakes and our rivers, because everyone is concerned with the quality of drinking water and the number of days when you're not allowed to swim in the lakes in Iowa, and how that's been increasing, and with the drought that we're seeing, and the severity of the storms and the increase in ag chemicals that we're using, it's just a perfect storm of something needs to be done. And there's some really good research going on out there, and I think we need to push it maybe a little less mandatory and put some policies in place where it's required.
Ms. Wessel-Crushel?
There's nothing more important to any of us than good quality drinking water or any of our water. And, you know, all of us know that life depends on that. We have to absolutely have water. We're suffering from a drought, so we are seeing less and less water replaced right now. And interesting to me, we've given many, many tax breaks to businesses who are coming here and are using an extensive amount of our water. So we're giving them tax breaks. They're coming here because they know we have more water than where they would normally build or start their business. First of all, we can certainly stop giving tax breaks to those for those purposes. There's absolutely no reason for that. I'm no expert on water and drilling for wells, but a very good friend of mine is a geologist who specializes in water, and I meet with him at least a couple of times a year. And one of the things he's been telling me for many years, maybe even since I was first elected, is that we don't have a water plan in this state. We had one at one point, but it hasn't been updated. We haven't even checked to see what what we need to do in terms of improving our water access and our water quality in terms of groundwater in particular. So first, you know, we need a plan. We need to know what the problem is and do our very best to make sure that we can always have safe water for all Iowans.
Thank you. Mr. Wilburn?
Helping, manage, take care of our water resource, natural resource. I mean, one, you've got to be aware of the problem, and our governor not supporting monitoring our waterways is not a way to go about doing that. We've got to monitor our waterways. We've got to do education. We've got to address the formula in terms of the confined animal farm operations. All of those, including looking at some of the tax incentives that some of the companies coming here. If you're getting free water and you're also contaminating it, we've got to have the Department of Natural Resources, and we've got to empower them with enough people power and enforcement ability to make sure that we're keeping our waterways safe and clean.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert?
The only role I would think that the government should have in this would probably be to put forth a constitutional amendment to actually deal with pollution. I think that would kind of be the one and done deal that we should probably do. Obviously, if you're destroying the water quality or if you're destroying the air for your neighbor, you're kind of infringing. Well, you're not kind, you are infringing on their rights, and I think that that's the appropriate way to deal with it.
Mr. Kronbach?
Well, water quality is a hot topic here. There are lots of things that we can do to try to improve the water quality, and the urgency behind that. We just went through the summer season. How many creeks, how many lakes, how many rivers were unswimmable, unfit for human consumption or human even being in, going swimming? The water quality in our natural environment is just terrible. And of course that's going to ultimately affect the quality of the drinking water we have. So I think that we need to address a number of agricultural processes. We need to address fertilizer usage. We need to encourage cover crops. We have to limit the spreading of manure on the fields, when and how it can be done and how much. All of those things are very difficult issues for some people, but in terms of the amount of fertilizer or insect or herbicide put on the fields, if it runs off, it doesn't do the farmer any good, right? So there is an area there where mutual benefit can be achieved. Now, our libertarian friend here says, well, the government shouldn't do anything about that except maybe amend the Constitution. Well, amending the Constitution is the biggest step that we can take, all right? Water quality is just one example of environmental pollution. And every economist worth his salt, and I taught at Iowa State 29 years, knows that environmental problems is an example of a market failure. All right, there isn't a financial incentive to reduce the pollution or to use less polluting processes given by the private marketplace. All right. Now, if you want to devise policies that address that, there are market-type mechanisms that you can use. You establish a carbon market, or you establish a sulfur market. Well, SO2, sulfur dioxide, there's been a market for that, marketable permits, or is what the economists called. That's been in place for 30 years. And it has dramatically reduced the amount of sulfur dioxide emitted to the air at far less cost to the economy than even the proponents initially thought. So we can use market-based mechanisms to deal with this market failure problem. And water quality, air pollution, all of these come off of CAFOs, all of those things we should be addressing. Now, a market-based solution may not work for everything. Sometimes we may need direct regulation. But to ignore the problem, to throw up your hands and say, we can't do anything about this, all you're doing is selling our future generations down a muddy river.
Thank you. Next question. What can the legislature do to provide funding for mental health support, especially for students and younger people? And we'll start with Ms. Wessel-Crushell.
The issue we've been dealing with for so long. So I think it was 2017, it's been a few years now, we passed a mental health program for young people, a children's mental health program. I am fully supportive of providing a mental health program for children in the state of Iowa. The problem with that bill, and the reason I voted against it, was there was no funding, and it's been 5 years, and we still don't have any funding for it. No new funding for it. This week I had the opportunity to tour at Mary Greeley, where they are opening a new behavioral health unit, and they are expanding beds. There won't be any beds for children in that unit. Those are still not in our hospital, but they will be expanding beds for adults, and it will be it looks like a really incredible unit, and I'm really happy that that is happening here in our city. But What can we do in terms of funding that? I will tell you that we need to increase our Medicaid reimbursement rates for mental health and probably across the board. We have, again, let me say the number again, $1.1 billion in the bank. In the past week, I have heard about 3 Story County teenagers who have committed suicide. We can do better than this, and there's no excuse not to.
Mr. Wilburn?
We've got to have a comprehensive mental health care system. We've got to have one, especially for our young people. You shouldn't have to have these long delays in trying to get services. You shouldn't have to travel 2 and 3 states over to get access to service. You know, there have been some things that have been done, but it's not enough. You've got to fund it. You know, those bills that come up that are a shell that the governor put forward is to say that the problems are being addressed. You know, fortunately, you know, here in Ames, YSS has some funding that's coming, and Governor, it's American Rescue Recovery Funds, even though he didn't want to say it. But you know, we've got the surplus. We've got to invest. We've got to invest in our people, and you make a decision how it's going to go. But you've got to have revenue too. And one of the big ones is that we have heard from a significant number of Iowans are willing to let's have Iowa be a state where there's cannabis, both for medical and recreation. It's happening in the states around us. There's a lot of money going, you know, to other states, but you know, it's something that can be done. It's something that we can catch up, and that money can go towards using that. But we can also, you know, by revving up our mental health system, it gets at prevention too. You know, that there's medical reasons that folks will use, you know, but there's some mental health issues that people decide to use cannabis, and we need to be addressing those causal factors that turn people to cause to try and manage that emotional pain. And so there are ways to try and build health and give people skills so that they have options. But that's a significant source of revenue that can go and support that.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert?
Yeah, I don't think the government really has any place in this. I think that all the mental health care institutes should be privatized. I guess what we could do around that is remove any kind of taxes, any kind of barriers that would take away their ability to make profit. Because in the long run, I mean, you have to be able to basically turn a profit to keep these places open in the first place. Removing any kind of bureaucracy around that would, you know, probably help.
Thank you. Mr. Krumbach?
You want to know how big the mental health crisis is? Front page article in today's Tribune. A young man who was, 15, killed himself. The article goes on to some great extent, and you really ought to read the whole article. It goes on to a great extent at going through what all the family tried to do to get this kid help. They knew he had depression, they knew he was in crisis, they knew that he was thinking about suicide, but they didn't have access to the resources to get him the help that would have kept him alive. Okay? Now, as Beth mentioned, she and I and some other people did get a tour of Mary Greeley Medical Center, their new behavioral health unit. I was very pleased to see that they're adding that. Certainly mental health resources at all ages and levels are very much necessary. But they didn't have anything for the kids. And I asked them about that, because we've heard a lot about the mental health problems with the kids. Let me point to a couple of good things. We're complaining about a lot of stuff tonight. There are a couple of good things. One is that the legislature has passed a program that is going to be implemented in the next year or so to provide student loan repayment for non-prescribing mental health practitioners. That means everybody except psychiatrists, all right? And that's good. I serve on the College Student Aid Commission, one of the other things I do to keep myself busy, and we have been working very hard at rewriting a badly written bill, rewriting the rules to make it functional. That's going to pass the College Student Aid Commission at the next meeting. It then has to go through a legislative committee, but I think that that program is going to be online in the very near future. It only addresses one of the aspects of the shortage, but it's positive. Another positive thing, the Ames Police Department now has somebody working for them that's in a job called Mental Health Advocate. All right, her name is Julie Saxton, and she rides along with officers when they have a call that sounds like it might involve somebody who is having a mental health crisis. And she isn't a provider herself, but she is able to make contact between the individual and the counseling resources to help get the person the help they need before they hurt themselves, before they hurt somebody else, before they break the law, before they wind up in jail. This is a terrific development. And at the meeting at Mary Greeley, we also were told about a broader effort that involves emergency management people. They're trying to broaden out that service. Now, I've offered bills at the state level to try to provide grant fundings for startups, for other communities to do the same darn thing. The Republicans have voted that down. Okay? So they're not really serious about helping us with mental health. They passed the one bill that Beth referred to. They didn't put any money behind it. My time's up. Sorry, John.
Ms. Bostler?
Okay, what can the legislature do? Pass a damn bill. That's what they can do. Put some money behind it, put some teeth into it. For one thing, they could incentivize mental health practitioners to come to Iowa. They could throw plenty of money at it. It would take a lot. But I've seen some horrible figures. I went to a mental health forum, candidate forum, and I do not have figures with me, but it is something like tens of thousands of patients for each mental health provider in the state of Iowa. We are extremely shorthanded, so let's try to get some practicing professionals in here. And the second thing is build a pipeline, incentivize students to go into this field and grow our own mental health practitioners who would stay in the state. You know how outrageously expensive college is getting, again, underfunding, thank you state. But if you could provide services, I grew up on an Indian reservation, and the doctor who delivered my children was working off their college, their medical school tuition that the government gave them if they would then work for so many years in an underserved community. And that's the kind of drastic help that we need right now. I talked with our county sheriff on what are the issues facing law enforcement. His number one issue, the only issue he wanted to discuss with me, was mental health. Our law enforcement has become the front line, and they have to deal with people with mental health emergencies, which is a danger to them and a danger to the person in crisis. We all know how badly that can turn out. But then they have to house them. These people are found, we cannot charge them because they're mentally ill. But then they warehouse them in our county jails and our city jails without treatment, without medication. They are in crisis, they're a danger to themselves, they're a danger, and so many of jail workers are being harmed physically, damaged in this situation. It's dangerous for everybody involved, but they can't be even seen and treated. The mental health advocate over here is great, and they actually come to Boone County when we have such a thing, an issue like this. But the bad part of that is it takes a minimum of an hour to notify them and get them on site. And you're probably aware that somebody in a serious mental health crisis, we may not have an hour to intervene in some fashion. So, yeah, let's pass it down, Bill, shall we?
Thank you. As I stated at the beginning of our forum, if there are questions yet to be asked as the 8 o'clock hour approaches, these questions will take priority over closing remarks, and I still have a question. Do you believe that men who are not in the military or protective services can be ordered by the state to risk their lives, risk property, risk physical and mental health, job security, and other undue burdens, not having sworn an oath or made any agreement to do so? If no, why can the state demand this of pregnant women? And we will start with Mr. Wilburn. Would you like me to read it again?
Yes, please.
Do you believe that men who are not in the military or protective services can be ordered by the state to risk their lives, risk property, risk physical and mental health, job security, and other undue burdens, not having sworn an oath or made any agreement to do so? If no, why can the state demand this of pregnant women?
I'm not sure if this is related to, if the metaphor, and correct me if I'm wrong, the person that asked it, if this is related to protecting our reproductive freedoms. That's
I
my
would say yes.
Okay, yeah, I
would say
it's,
yes.
yeah, it's been a long day, so I just want to say, you know, that's an excellent question, and they shouldn't be required. Reproductive freedom is critical. I alluded in my opening remarks that that's really a hallmark of what it means to be a free society, that an individual with their healthcare provider making that difficult decision in terms of access to abortion, but also beyond that, you know, their health care. It's not something that's going to be, you know, it's not a pandemic example where the government does have an obligation to protect each other in terms of what we've just been through with COVID. But this is critical and the heart of what it means to be, and as a male, I should not be trying to intervene myself between you know, someone exercising their reproductive freedom. I just shouldn't.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert?
I couldn't agree with him more. The question itself seems kind of, I don't even know what they're trying to get at. We obviously have the draft. So, I mean, they can force you to do that, but as far as reproductive freedom and reproductive rights go, the government shouldn't be telling women what to do with their body. They shouldn't be really telling anybody what to do with their body.
Thank you. Mr. Kernbach?
Well, to the extent that the question is directed at abortion and choice, I am firmly pro-choice. I think we ought to enact statutorily the provisions of Roe v. Wade, allowing a woman to make that decision in consultation with her doctor, but not reporting to the governor or anybody else in the legislature. And there's a good line on that, but I'm not going to offer it. As far as the other half of the question, I remember the draft. I was not a big fan of the draft. Ultimately, I was not called, but I have huge respect for the people who did serve, whether they served because they were conscripted or whether they served subsequently. We've had, you know, for almost 50 years a volunteer army, and it's still the strongest, best army in the world. I have been very much involved in Veterans Affairs here locally. I've served on the Ames Patriotic Council for about 20 years, I think a little more than that now. I've served as president. I'm currently treasurer, and that's the group that puts on Veterans Day and Memorial Day ceremonies, okay? So Veterans Day is coming up, November 11th, the traditional date at the traditional hour of 11 o'clock. It's going to be over at the City Auditorium this year. Please do come and honor all the service people, whether you're a veteran yourself or have friends or relatives who've been in the military. It's very important to show them the respect. And in fact, when I had begun serving on the Patriotic Council, the end of one meeting back in about 2000, it was 2000, I opened my mouth and I said, well, okay, we do fine with Veterans Day and Memorial Day. What do we do to honor veterans the other 363 days of the year? Well, you got to watch opening your mouth. 10 minutes later, I was chairing the Veterans Memorial Committee, and 6 years later, and $250,000 raised, we built the thing down at the west end of Fifth Street. So be sure to go by there, take a look at all of the things that people have served for and sacrificed for. There are a lot of veterans whose names are in the bricks in the walkway, but there are also some of the things, some of the concepts that they've fought for, like freedom of speech, and all of our other constitutional rights.
Ms. Vossler?
Pregnancy is a risk to your job, to your physical and mental health, and it is also a risk to the life of that pregnant woman. Especially in America, we're doing a poor job. There are a lot of places you're at least an hour away from any kind of help should you have a problem with your pregnancy, and we all know the statistics. At least 1 out of 4, and some say 1 out of 3 pregnancies end in a miscarriage. So there are a lot of things that can and do go wrong. My first pregnancy was a tubal pregnancy. I was maybe 6 or 7 weeks along. I did not know that I was pregnant. I was a young bride, and we were trying for our first child, and I didn't know I was pregnant. I didn't know that at the time. The pain dropped me to my knees where I could not reach the wall phone to call for help. I did not know what was wrong with me. But when the pain subsided and I got help, I was rushed into emergency surgery and they removed it. The procedure to remove that pregnancy that gets stuck in your fallopian tube is considered an abortion. And that would be illegal under a lot of different state laws, and women will die. In states that are very restrictive on their abortion, no exceptions for the life of a mother, doctors are admitting these women to the hospital and waiting till it ruptures and then trying to save their life before they bleed out. And I don't know why people seem like to have a very limited understanding of the human reproductive system are trying to legislate it. And I'm not a fan of that. So of course I'm pro-choice on that. There are ways, the line, next time I have to go see my gynecologist, I'm going to invite my legislator along in case there are any decisions that need to be made about my health care. Because obviously they don't feel that I am competent, my doctor and I between us are competent to make those decisions. Also, making abortion illegal has never stopped abortion, it only has stopped safe abortion. And if you really oppose abortion, which most of the people who say they do not really, because the way to prevent it is to prevent the pregnancy in the first place. Let's make birth control free for everyone who wants it. Let's educate our youngsters on how are made. That whole human reproduction thing, it's not, it's science. If we look at the reproductive system of a frog, I think we can cover humans in there as well. And an educated young person is much less likely to have an unwanted pregnancy. But let's make it easy for people not to get pregnant when they don't want to. And that's a lot cheaper than childbirth.
Thank you. Ms. Wessel-Crushel?
It's hard to. I'm not hearing that. Oh, there I am. Okay, it's hard in this year to have a discussion, a political discussion in particular, without talking about reproductive health care. We've lost the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decision, Dobbs, to overturn Roe v. Wade, is going to put every individual of childbearing age in danger. All Iowans deserve access to full spectrum reproductive health care. We all do. There are women in other states where these laws have already been implemented and who are serving time in jail, who have gone to jail for a miscarriage. That's a real story. Those are real stories. I've been a leader in the House on this issue for many years. It's a healthcare decision. It is not a decision that belongs in the Iowa legislature or Congress or the Supreme Court. It belongs in between a woman and her healthcare provider. You can't get a more personal decision. There just couldn't possibly be a more personal decision, and each deserves the right to make that decision on our own. What we'll be seeing here is on October 28th, the district court has been asked to reconsider their decision on the 6-week ban that was proposed, or that has passed the Iowa legislature and signed by the governor. They turned that bill down, that law down, a few years ago. The governor chose not to take it to the Supreme Court at that time because she knew she would lose. She has since stacked the courts so that she has a very good chance of winning if it gets to the Supreme Court. I don't know what the district court is going to do, but we could be seeing that become law very soon if they choose to reconsider it. Also, we passed a constitutional amendment to ban all abortions in the state of Iowa, and that we will reconsider that amendment one more time before it will go to the vote of the people. So we will be reconsidering that, have the opportunity to reconsider it in 2023 or 2024. If it passes, then it will be on the ballot. This affects every aspect of our lives. And this is why each and every one of us must go to the polls. If you don't have any other reason to go to the polls this week.
Thank you. Thank you all for a very informative evening. Before we conclude, I want to remind everyone to vote on November 8th. If you have already requested an absentee ballot, you have until November 8th to deliver the absentee ballot in person to the Administration Building, 906th Street in Nevada, between the hours of 8 and 5. To register to vote, please go to the Story County Auditor's Office to download a voter registration form, or you can register to vote on Election Day at the correct polling place for your address and proper ID. Or, to make it much more convenient for you, we have a table right back here where you can register to vote and or request an absentee ballot. Also, please go to your computers and check Vote 411, a voter's guide, for more information on these candidates and their responses to a series of questions. Thank you, candidates, for taking the time to share your views and for your commitment to serve. And thank you all here for actively participating in the election process. This concludes our candidate forum. Good night.